Hi, and welcome to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is a podcast where we revisit and reinterpret one of the greatest TV shows ever made, if I may say so myself, Lost.
Every week we'll bring you a new episode with our thoughts on an episode of Lost. We'll also have interviews with people who worked on the show. We're starting this week with director Jack Bender.
So let's get started. So one of the reasons we're doing this is, we've been talking about Lost recently, and we realized between the two of us that we just had super different experiences watching this show. I watched it starting with season 2, week by week, watched every episode as it aired, went into the forums, read the theories and all that stuff.
And I actually didn't get into Lost until 2010, just as it was ending. A coworker lent me the DVDs, and I just couldn't put it down. It was the first show I ever binge-watched. But one of the things we hope from The Hatch is to sort of recapture that experience that Sammy had, watching one episode at a time, ruminating, taking a break, overthinking it.
One thing to make a note of is we're not going to worry about spoilers. If you are watching Lost with us for the first time, that's wonderful. Thanks for being here. Be warned that we're going to talk about things that happen later, including the finale.
One final disclaimer, neither of us have any expertise of any kind in television. We are both newspaper reporters. We live in Palm Springs, California. I write about housing and real estate.
I write about energy.
But we're big fans, so hopefully we are just like you in this case. This week, of course, we watched season 1, technically episodes 1 and 2, the pilot. We're going to start every episode with hot takes, which are just sort of gut reactions in your mind.
You guys know what a hot take is.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Rosie, what's your hot take on the pilot?
So my favorite part of the pilot involves the pilot. It's when Kate and Charlie and Jack go to find the cockpit, and the pilot tells them that they were 1,000 miles off course, and, quote,
"They're looking for us in the wrong place."
Ta-da.
Oh, the shiver just went down my spine. I was so excited to see that again. That's the moment when I watched Lost for the first time that I was totally hooked, and I wanted to know what was going to happen.
That's interesting. For me, I didn't quite have the same thing until the end of the pilot with the guys, where are we, in the 16-year recording and everything.
Well, what's your hot take?
So my hot take is about the sort of dynamic between Sawyer and Sayid, where Sawyer sort of immediately accuses Sayid of causing the plane crash and thinks he's a terrorist. And, I just think that's something that in 2004, when this first aired, a couple of years after 9/11, that might have not seemed so quite so out of place or quite so unusual.
And like 24 was on TV at that time.
That's
there were
true.
all of these other shows that were like dealing with some of those same concerns.
Right, and now with everything that's been going on in the last year especially, I just felt much more jarred by it than I was the first time, and sort of angrier at Sawyer and more uncomfortable with, not the fact that they were doing this storyline. I think it's a great storyline, but more uncomfortable with, this is, this kind of racism seems to just be a part of who Sawyer is, and that's not great.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I think Sawyer is kind of an equal opportunity asshole. I
Fair.
don't think it's limited
Fair.
to Sayid. It's just the first context in which we see it.
So now,
Question number 2. Sammy, who's a character who really stood out to you in this episode? Obviously, in the pilot, we meet basically the whole cast. We meet a good dozen people, and they all get like a relatively equal amount of screen time. So who spoke to you in the pilot?
the pilot is super intense, and
It
I had
is.
sort of forgotten quite how intense it is. I mean, the scene you mentioned with the, Monster eats the pilot, and the ending sequence, and Kate's flashback to the plane crash is kind of hard to watch.
Yeah, it's intense.
It's so intense. The briefcase comes down and hits the marshal in the forehead. That is shocking. Anyway, all of which is to say, I much more appreciated Charlie than I remembered appreciating the first
I love
time.
Charlie.
Just with all of his, sort of one-liners and lightening the mood a little bit. I really loved his line when they were walking through and the rain starts. Like,
Hey guys, is this normal? Kind of day turning into night, end of the world type weather. Is this, guys?
it was so real.
One of the
and-
things I love about Charlie is that I think he's reacting in a lot of the ways I would be reacting.
Huh.
And I feel like he's really relatable in a way that like Jack is not, for instance.
Totally unrelatable, but
yeah.
yeah, no, you're right. He is, and just wanting the attention of like, oh, I'm so, she recognizes me. I was waiting for someone to say that. It just, I'd forgotten how much the pilot needs Charlie, I
Yeah,
think, and
yeah.
maybe later Hurley provides some of that comic relief, but at the beginning, it's all Charlie. Who spoke to you, Rosie?
I love Kate. She's one of my favorite characters throughout. And I forgot in the pilot that she does this she walks this really fine line because she doesn't want anybody to know who she is. And we don't find out who she is until the very end, well, near the end of the pilot.
Right.
For instance, when she's stitching up Jack and sort of acting like she's not good around blood and she's really nervous, like, of course, what we learn about Kate later suggests that that was all an act, right? That she was just trying to fly under the radar. But boy, does she turn out to be kick-ass.
She does. I like that you get just a little glimpse of it when she takes the gun off of Sawyer. And for a split second, oh shit, how did she do that?
Yeah, because she moves really fast, and all of a sudden she has this gun pointed at Sawyer, and you're like, oh crap, is she going to shoot Sawyer? Like, you don't know what's going to happen. And then she says, of course, I don't know how to use a gun, which of course is not true.
Since you mentioned the scene where she's sewing up Jack, do you mind if I do another hot take?
I hate that scene.
Oh man, you know, Jack kind of wins me over by the end of the show, like, but Matthew Fox was just never an especially fun actor to watch. And when he's doing the speech to Kate about the surgery that goes wrong, and he's
So it ripped open. And the nerves just spilled out of her like angel hair pasta. Spinal fluid flowing out of her, and
Oh, and he's making that really pained face and just sort of...
I like that they're trying to establish that this is our hero character, and he's struggled and he's come through, but God, does Matthew Fox not sell that very well?
It's also just a terrible line.
Yeah.
Oh,
It is. The only part of that was good for me is the callback when Kate is hiding in the forest from the monster and she
That's
counts to
right.
5. And that sort of made it a little bit more worthwhile for me.
that's right. And that sort of lays... Like, you know from the pilot that there's going to be a Kate Jack love story.
Yeah.
Like, you know from the stitching scene.
Yeah.
Which, well,
I
we can talk about as we
you
go.
know when they introduced Juliet and did the Juliet Sawyer thing, like that was great. You know, Juliet forever, always. That's wonderful. Until then, I was always more of a Kate and Sawyer fan.
Me
than,
too.
Yeah.
It just made more sense.
Right.
Yeah. And Jack, come on. But anyway,
Yeah. Exactly.
so the final thing we want to make sure we talk about is what's different in hindsight. So we watched the pilot. Sammy watched it 12 years ago for the first time.
11, but yeah.
I watched it 6 years ago for the first time. And what is different, knowing what we know about how Lost ends, about, the context in which it was made, what sort of resonates differently?
For me, watching the pilot, it was really interesting to think about the sequence of events leading up to the plane crash. It was sort of hard to watch it, the plane coming apart in the flashbacks and everyone crashing on the beach, and to not be thinking about Desmond running back to the hatch to push the button and failing to get there in time, and Ben and Juliet doing the book club meeting in the other village, and just sort of all of these things that are simultaneously happening that are informing and in case of Desmond, causing the crash.
Did Desmond cause the crash?
Yes, Desmond caused the crash.
I mean, so I was always under the impression that, yes, Desmond forgot to push the button and he had to carry around the guilt of thinking he caused the crash, but I don't know that he actually...
If Jacob wanted them to come there,
Right.
is Desmond the instrument by which Jacob brought them to the island, or did Jacob do something separate? I don't know how to...
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Do you have any things that were different for you in hindsight?
I had forgotten how little John Locke we get.
Yeah, you're right.
Until his episode, until Walkabout probably, because he has only one scene in the pilot, right? It's where he's playing backgammon.
Yeah, the scene with Walt where he says, "Hey Walt, do you want to know a secret?"
Two things. That's different in hindsight because, of course, there's Jacob and the Man in Black playing backgammon on the beach
Ooh,
in one
yeah.
of those season 6 scenes.
Yeah. One side is light, one side is dark.
A little heavy-handed, but still. And isn't it implied that the backgammon set that John Locke found is the same backgammon set that they were using?
Oh, that would be interesting. I hadn't thought about
I think
that.
it is, but I might be wrong about that.
You don't think Locke is just traveling with backgammon in his carry-on bag?
No, I don't. Well, actually, I don't know.
Maybe if he was going on a walkabout, and he's probably not.
Yeah.
Too many knives in there.
But he only gets that one scene, and then he says, "Do you want to know a secret?" And he never tells us what the secret is.
That's true.
Did you notice that?
I did. In the next episode, which we'll talk about next week, but just to flash ahead a little bit, there's a scene with Walt and Michael where Michael asks Walt, "What did he tell you?" And Walt said, "He told me a miracle happened to him." But he didn't say what the miracle was. So they kind of, and I hadn't caught that the first time around, but they kind of foreshadow a little bit, but they still keep you in the dark.
Details. Good to know. Yeah, but no, I was surprised because, of course, John becomes such a prominent character. I was surprised that we got so little of him. Almost to the point where you can't even tell if he's going to be important or if he's just quirky.
Yeah, there's the orange smile, which I
Yeah.
still don't understand, by the way.
I think he's just being weird.
But that was the most sort of prominent Locke moment at all. I mean, backgammon, and then the orange smile. But to me, I remember the orange smile.
Yeah, and it was off-putting because you're like, you have no information about this person. Like, you have no... Even, like, Boone and Shannon get more... You get more information about them.
Boone and Shannon.
Boo. I wonder if that was, like, a conscious choice on the writer's part to keep him a mystery. I don't know.
It's a good question. I should ask Jack Bender that. Should we get to the interview?
I think we should. So Sammy sat down with director Jack Bender at his home in Los Angeles.
He directed the finale of the show, many of the other important episodes.
And was he an executive producer as well?
Yes, he was.
You will, just an FYI, you will hear a fountain in the background. They were sitting outside in his patio.
He has a very nice patio.
Also several dogs.
Let's
Just
get to
roll
that.
with it.
All right, welcome back to The Hatch. This is your co-host, Sammy Roth, and I'm sitting here with the man responsible for bringing the actual Hatch to life. That would be Jack Bender, lead director throughout the course of Lost, directed some of the best episodes, every season finale, the series finale. You were an executive producer of the show. Thanks for talking to us, Jack.
My pleasure, Sammy.
So let's start at the beginning. Could you tell me a little bit just about how you got involved with Lost, who brought you on board?
Sure. I had worked with J.J. Abrams. I first met J.J. on his wonderful show Felicity, and I directed, and he and I really enjoyed working together, and were very in sync with, just aesthetics and tone and various things like that, and humor, actually. And then when J.J. created Alias, I ended up directing many of those episodes, season 1. Throughout the years, he and I stayed in touch and talked about, me doing various things with him. And I was doing Alias at the time. Cut 2 months later, he calls me up and he says, listen, the show's going to go, and I think you're the guy to run it in Hawaii, creatively. And I remember sitting down and watching the pilot. And it was with my 2 daughters, Sophie and Hannah, and my wonderful wife, Rabbi Laura, who wasn't a rabbi yet. And we sat down and watched this intimidatingly brilliant pilot.
It's so good.
It's so good. And, and I know how brilliant JJ is and everything, but it was just so good. And I know that they had carte blanche at the network because Lloyd Braun was running drama at the time, and the show was his idea. And JJ came in toward the end and saved it and got this young writer, Damon Lindelof, to write it with him. And it was all very last minute, and they went off to Hawaii and did this, and I stayed back and did Alias. And so back to sitting there and watching this brilliant pilot. When it was over, all I could think was, how the F do you do that every week? How is that possible? And I turned to my family, and they were looking at me with their mouths open, and they went, well, guess you're going to Hawaii. And I went, whoa, not so fast. I got to think about this because blah, blah, blah. And they went, no, you're going. And I went, oh, my God. And then Damon and I got together, and we talked about the show. We talked about focusing the show as much about the monsters inside the characters as around the characters, meaning, and I said, well, if I've got to keep the cinematic scope in the show, and yet if in the writing and in the direction we can juxtapose that with the intimacy of character. And they had a brilliant cast they put together in a really bizarre way at the last minute, and wrote characters for actors. That's a whole different story. If you want to hear it, I'll tell you. But the point is, after having conversations and getting over my insecurity about I'm going to be known as the guy who blows this great pilot. I thankfully said yes. And then the rest, as they say, sounds pretentious, is television history. I was very grateful that I said yes, and the people in my life, my wonderful wife and daughter, said, you got to go do this. And I knew I did. I just was scared because I didn't know how you could every week.
I mean, so it sounds like you had a sense, even at the beginning, that this could be a really big deal.
Well, you know what? I don't think any of us knew. The network, first of all, the network didn't believe in it when it was finished. They thought it was a great pilot, clearly. They never were behind Lloyd's crazy-ass idea of this island show. In fact, Lloyd, shortly after it was picked up, got fired,
Right.
as it happens in networks. And they never believed in the show, and they thought it was so crazy that maybe they should just put it on the air as like 3 2-hour movies throughout the year. So we went off to make this show with not a lot of faith from the network. We got support, but we didn't have a lot of faith behind us and wind in our sails. And they, for instance, were very against flashbacks, which was very much the formula of the show, because historically flashbacks on TV never worked, they felt.
Why did you feel like the flashbacks were so important?
Well, I think that originally came from Damon and JJ as they started to, at the beginning, figure out, okay, how are we going to make this show work now? And I think they quickly realized that we've got to tell their stories. This show has to be as much about people. Well, it's very much about people who were more lost before they crashed, than when they crash, and the lives they find there in their survival. And I think they realized that they had to unfold the mystery and the layers of the onion and the characters through flashbacks juxtaposed with their time on the island.
So you mentioned earlier that the cast came together in a sort of haphazard way and that characters were created for particular actors. Tell me a little bit more about how that worked.
Pilot season was already underway. So a lot of the characters, a lot of the actors you would normally go for were already booked in other pilots. So for instance, and this is the unconventional way they cast it, which is why we ended up with the most unique cast, I think, on a television show maybe ever, and certainly since ER, as far as an ensemble show. So you had Yunjin was under contract at ABC.
And that's Sun.
Yeah. And ABC says, oh, you got to meet this woman. She's under contract. She's a big star in Korea, blah, blah, blah. They meet her, flip out for her, and then one of them, JJ or Damon, say, oh my God, what if we have a Korean woman in our show, and she's married to a Korean guy, and they don't speak English? That totally came out of wanting to put Yunjin in the show. So they found Daniel Day Kim and put him in the show. JJ one day came in after seeing Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Hurley played a guy, where Jorge Garcia played a guy.
Wasn't he a drug dealer in that?
Yeah, he was selling Dodger tickets, scamming Dodger tickets or something.
Right.
And JJ said, I just saw this guy who's the greatest guy ever. We've got to meet him and write a character named Hurley for him. Hurley wasn't in the script. Matt originally went in and Matt Fox read for Hurley. No, I forget, that's really stupid. Read for Sawyer. So, and of course Evangeline Lilly had never acted, as crazy as that is. So the point is that this cast was put together. Usually pilots get written and then you go after all the predictable people who are on the list. They put this together in a backwards way, which is one of the reasons it was so amazing and unique. So that's how Yunjin came to be on the show. Naveen, I think, was a character. I'm not sure whether they met Naveen, saw Naveen, wanted him in the show, or conceived of that character
And that's
before.
Naveen Andrews, who plays Saeed.
Who played Saeed. But I do remember being a little bit of a liberal wuss early on, the first season of Lost, when he's sticking those bamboo shoots in episode 3 or whatever it was to try to get the whenever it was when he was torturing Sawyer, who was hoarding all the stuff,
Right.
and Maggie's character needed asthma medicine. And I had ideas about that, which I brought to the party, which I was very gratified they did. But I was very worried about one of our leads torturing one of our leads. And God bless Damon and Carlton at the time. They stuck to it. I didn't say we can't do this, but I was cautious. I said, really, can we do this? And they wanted flawed characters and real people. And they were right. And that's what we ended up doing. And Naveen and I got very close, and I think his work, I remember Josh's work in the pilot was a little stiffer than it became, and he just got looser and looser, and more of him came out with his nicknames and all that stuff that he started to do, and they wrote to. So the show, they grew into their characters, and the writers let them grow and took them along the path of where they were going to grow and go.
Wow, can you imagine what Lost would have been without flashbacks?
No, not even a little bit.
That's totally crazy for me to even conceive of. Like, even in the pilot, there's flashbacks, and they're just to the crash, but
But you kind of also need to see the crash.
Yeah.
And how do you do it without the flashbacks?
yeah, that's true. But of course, like Jack said, like so much of what makes Lost great is, what everybody was doing before, this idea that everybody gets a fresh start on the island.
The monsters within versus the monsters without.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of conversations about whether or not the island is or was intended to be an allegory for like a purgatory. I totally think it is. You are less on board with that theory.
No, I mean I think it's an allegory for
Okay.
sure. I kind of think they originally intended it to be purgatory and then
Yeah.
backed away from that when she didn't want to go that route. But I don't know. It definitely feels like it. The thing that I love about the flashbacks the most is that they pave the way for the flash forwards and then the flash sideways and all that stuff in
Yes.
later years. I'm super into the weird time bending stuff.
Me
So
too.
so to me, when the flashbacks were fun, but the fact that they enabled them to do the crazy stuff, that's my favorite part.
Yeah. But you were going to move on to something else.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Oh, well, what is it?
Oh, it was just the point he made about Sun.
Oh, yeah.
Can't imagine the show without Sun either.
No. I mean, and that's such a realistic, that seems so likely that of course there would have been a couple on this plane from Sydney to Los Angeles that don't speak English. I'm surprised
Right.
there weren't more people who don't speak English.
I also think that Yoonjin Kim in the pilot just phenomenal, communicates so much, even though you never hear her speak a word of English, and she hardly has any dialogue in Korean either.
That's true. Yeah, Sun too. And Hurley? Can you,
No.
what would Lost have been without Hurley? Hurley is one of those unlikely heroes, almost to the point where he's a caricature, but not quite.
At the beginning, he is a little like when he can't spell bodies,
Oh, yeah.
and when he passes out because he sees blood.
Yeah,
Just he becomes less of a caricature very quickly.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. Oh, and it was also when he talks about thinking of himself as a liberal wuss because he didn't want, of course, when Saeed tortures Sawyer, we just looked it up. It's not until episode 8. We'll talk about it. But would have loved to be in the room for that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Whatever the conversation was like, they certainly pulled it off because
Yeah.
Saeed is obviously a heroic character that you root for, and I think they've established that by the time they do that scene.
That's true. Saeed gets a real shit treatment in season 6, though.
Yeah, I don't want to think about that right now.
Okay, let's block that out.
Let's wait till season 6 and then think about that.
Well, then, that means that's it for our first episode of The Hatch.
Next week, please come back and join us. We're going to be watching Season 1, Episode 3, Tabula Rasa, which is about Kate. When you're finished watching the episode, give us a call. We have a phone number, 9546-DHARMA. That is 9546-DHARMA. And please leave us your hot take on the episode. Just watch it and give us the most flaming, fiery hot take that you can, and maybe we'll play it on the show next week.
Yeah, whether that's a moment, a character, a line that you just can't stand, just let it all out. We'll play them on the show. It'll be fun. You can also keep in touch with us on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast and at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. Our theme music is Just a Blip by Andy G. Cohen. You can find a link to his Bandcamp page in the show notes.
We'll be back next week. We'll have more from our interview with Jack Bender as well.
In the meantime, thanks for listening, and namaste.